about getting through the holidays and getting through a really interesting and challenging winter. I know parents, you guys have been in this for the long haul. You're many months into the pandemic at this point, and I think that a lot of us have been feeling quite exhausted for a while. So I just wanted to let you know that if you sort of landed on the couch, maybe poured yourself a cup of tea, you're in good company tonight, because we all really can relate to the challenges. And we're joined tonight by two clinicians who are going to introduce themselves in a moment, who have been putting heart and soul into pondering the questions that many of you submitted ahead of time. And we will do our best to get through as many questions as we can. And we will also be sharing a sort of a follow-up email after the webinar. I think you'll be receiving it tomorrow with a bunch more resources and links, because we want you to know, like, we're here for you, right? So without any further ado, David and Nicole, could you please introduce yourselves?
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Nicole, why don't you start? I know it's like that first part, we all just jump in, but definitely take it away, Nicole.
So my name is Nicole, and both of us are individual and family therapists out of the Luminous location. We both work out of the MLSE Launchpad site. So we provide ongoing drop-in counseling as well as workshops. So a lot of the workshops we've been doing have been around parents.
And I do the same work. I'm an individual and family therapist with Luminous, and Nicole did a great job of kind of talking about some of our services. One of the things I like to say about our services, free of charge, as well, due to the conditions under COVID, we are working in a virtual format or platform. So, if you want to reach out to us, we can definitely send along our email addresses. If you ever felt like you wanted to connect with us or on any questions outside of the scope of this webinar. So, we're honored to be here, and we can get started, I think.
Okay, that sounds great. So a major theme in the questions that were coming in from people was handling the holiday season. I think, we're all thinking about that so much right now, what is possible and how to still find joy and moments of connection with our kids during what is going to be, for sure, a very unusual holiday season. So just to get us started with a question, you guys, and I'll let you guys both decide who wants to dive in first this time. How can we still make the holidays feel special for our kids when really it's pandemic life continuing on and on?
I think that's a great question to start off. I think, when we think about the holidays and how that looks like this year, I just had a session and talked to some clients about that. And I think it's on top of mind for most folks. Interesting enough, when we think about kind of how things are, we definitely want to recognize that the holidays may seem not the same as it used to be. So I think that's the big piece as well. Like, validating the feelings and also normalizing that this may seem different for folks, for families and individuals. So I think when we talk about, we'll be using the term validation quite a bit. So I think maybe I'll speak a bit on that before, just so, people have an idea in terms of what that means in terms of us throwing the words around validation. So validation meaning acknowledging and accepting the experiences and feelings of someone else, in this case, our children. So it doesn't mean that, I think sometimes when I talk to parents, it's like, oh, then that means I have to accept their behavior. Not the case. It's really about trying to understand what they're feeling in that moment, as well as their experience to them. So I think about my own child, when they throw something across the room, I don't have to be okay with the throwing, but I could definitely validate that you're feeling upset. And interesting enough, when we use validation, it calms our system down. Our limbic system does so much wonderful things around grounding us. And we'll be talking about validation as well as some other interventions as well. So I want to start off that way. And when we talk about validating feelings, that, when we think about the situation we're in with COVID, is kind of this loss that we're all experiencing, things that could have been, should have been, things how they were. So really validating that loss, that things are different. Doesn't mean that's going to be different forever, but as well as like validating the feelings, which could give our children or child that sense of groundedness. When we're thinking about how do we make it special, especially now when the days feel like every other day, and it's hard to distinguish the days because of the conditions that we're in for most folks. So I say, like, is there a way to kind of create other new traditions or things that we do as a family, holiday things or rituals? It was just, whether it's creating new kind of ways to celebrate the holidays, whichever ways that we do, or kind of bringing on the old traditions as well, or things that we used to do before. I think that's really great to kind of give children a sense of consistency, right? In terms of like a sense of groundedness, that some things are different, but some things are the same. And also, if it's about looking externally for things, like things to do as a family, I know I'm looking for that as well. It's like, what are some things in the community or within our grasp or what are available to us that could make things a bit special, whether that is, a certain thing that we can do outdoors or embracing that. Interesting enough, I think one of the things that may come up, and we will be talking about that as well, is coping or helping our children and ourselves too as parents, coping with the disconnection from peers, family members, and the things that, that are really meaningful to us, because we're connection seeking beings, and connection is what makes us feel grounded. So really kind of validating that as well, that sense of like things are different and it is hard, and as well as, creating new things that we can do together as a family, whatever that looks like. And I really like to come from a place of let's be collaborative with our child or children. And I think gives them also a voice of what would be special to them. So hopefully, Nicole, you can, if you want, you can add a little bit as well.
You covered everything.
So we can
Okay, well, that's very definitive. That's a really powerful endorsement for David's comment. So, yeah. I really loved what you said about the validation, because sometimes, you don't necessarily want the person to solve the problem, and it might not even be possible to solve the problem. You can't say, voila, let's make the pandemic go away. It's not going to happen. But just to say, yeah, it is disappointing that, we're not going to be able to go and see the grandparents in another province or something like that. So yeah, I really appreciated that. And that sort of leads into the next question, which is all about managing feelings of disappointment or frustration. I mean, I've heard from so many parents that their kids are just like, I am so done with the pandemic. I'm so frustrated about all these rules and regulations. I guess we could tell them that we understand that so much, right?
Yeah, so I think really just echoing a lot of what Dave mentioned with the previous question, that validating. So the holidays may seem really different. And I think it's like the end of the year. It's been, I think like 9 months has it been that we've been kind of in this situation. So I think even those feelings of exhaustion as well, and just disappointed around, so many of us thought this was going to be a short-term piece and it's so much longer. So I think validating that the holidays are going to seem different and that it's okay to be disappointed, to be frustrated, and really that co-regulation piece as well. So like sometimes it's okay to share that you might also be feeling those pieces as well. And it's like, how are we going to get to this together? Because as a family, we've been in this situation, so we're going to move through this together. Really focusing on things that you can do. So, were there traditions that you had during the holidays that you really liked that might be a bit harder to do, but are there things that you can still take away pieces from it? Is it like maybe instead of seeing people, can you do like little video calls or sending a video to like a family member that you might not be able to see, and connect with them that way? Again, going back to what David mentioned before around creating like these new traditions and rituals and holidays, just around like there may be more time that everyone is kind of together. So like, are there things that you maybe have learned about each other or new traditions that you want to start that might be something that you all might really enjoy? And then like really just recognizing like disconnection and what are those feelings of disappointment. So when disappointment is coming up, what exactly is it about it? Is it like, I'm not going to be able to like hang out with my friends or go to camp, and that was something I really appreciated, or seeing certain family members? And then like knowing that, how can you find ways to have that connection so that you're not feeling completely disconnected? I know it's a little bit harder. I think a lot of people are getting tired of video calls and Zoom, but it might also feel different because maybe you're not in school, so you're not on a computer the whole time. So maybe being on a screen won't feel too bad. And just normalizing that feeling that, so many of us are experiencing these feelings. Similar to Dave, a lot of my conversations are just talking to kids around how this really feels different, especially for the kids who are just doing remote learning and just kind of at home and not maybe getting that interaction as much. So just normalizing that it's okay, like those feelings of disappointment, and it's okay to feel like that. And what can we kind of do together? I don't know, Dave, if you want to add anything else to that?
I think the big piece around co-regulation, I think, is interesting to talk about as well. Is that as a caregiver, parent, person that looks after a child or children, that they look to us as a reference point. So the more regulated we are, and I'm saying not being aloof, right, but being grounded, and even the way we speak or inflections in our voice, and even our tone of voice or even our volume can also regulate our children or child. So I'm even thinking about my own daughter when they're up, then we can come at a place of where we would want them to be. So really just even talking at a slower pace, really using that validation. It is different. Disappointment is hard. Frustration really sucks. And coming from a place of also humanizing, I think sometimes as parents, children kind of tend to idealize, hopefully, idealize us in the sense that we're not experiencing their feelings or what's going on for them. So really kind of coming from a place of, you know what, I'm feeling disappointed too. Because I really miss doing those things that we used to do. I really miss outdoors and doing things outdoors or whatever, or the frustration piece. It allows children to find language for feelings and experiences. So the more we come from a place of regulation and validation can really help children put some context to what they're experiencing. That in itself is a regulating effect. And another piece is around if you find that your children are, like lean towards art making or other things, is a way to kind of externalize the feelings that are going on inside. Right, when we're talking about how do we get those feelings out, I've heard one parent say we're going to make like holiday cookies. They're going to be amazing. I don't know how they're going to taste, but they're going to be a really great experience. So that's another way to kind of build that closeness, and because that is the foundation for difficult feelings and experiences is that foundation of closeness that we have with each other. So just want to add those pieces on.
Yeah, I really like that. And I see we have sort of a related question that I think this would be a good time to tackle, which is how to stay motivated during the holidays when mental energy is low all around, even for adults. And I understand that, we have an important role to play in sort of like setting the emotional tone for the family, but we don't have to feel like we have to be cheerleaders 24/7, right? So maybe one or both of you could comment on that briefly.
I like to kind of, in terms of like low energy, lack of motivation, definitely we're feeling COVID fatigue. Is like I think what I'm hearing a lot of, and it's real. And I think the big piece is around like how do we recharge as individuals and as a family? Because families have also indicated that maybe we'll take more breaks and spend some quality time. What can I do to recharge? And I think as parents and caregivers, we can role model that for our child or children. It's like, you know what? We're going to do something to take care of myself. And I think that allows us to recharge. And I think, when we talk about COVID, I think when Nicole said we didn't think it would be this long, like we don't have a crystal ball. So how do we stay in the game? How do we take care of ourselves? And I think it's a great lesson for our children or child around how do we take care of ourselves? How do we make space in this world of a lot of expectation and demands, especially during the holidays, around recharging? And how do we make space for that even in the daily day, like within a routine? And I think parents setting the tone and also role modeling that be really effective as well.
Yeah, I think just echoing everything Dave said and like even sharing. So I know I'm talking to some parents and they're talking about their kids, especially with the online. I think the online has been really tricky in terms of like doing schooling and just kind of recognizing like maybe your kids might need more breaks and emphasizing that piece around breaks and what you need to do for your like well-being too, and also the expectations that everyone has on each other. So I know like there might be higher expectations around like the holidays of all these things that we're going to do, and being able to name like maybe that's not where we're in exactly, and what might be things that we really want to focus on that we can put our energy towards, and also like recharging ourselves. I think that's such an important piece.
Yeah. And that just brilliantly leads into the next question that I have built up in our queue, which is what is your best advice on avoiding some of the most common holiday pitfalls, even in the best of times, including things like too much sugar, too many gifts, too many commitments? And I mean, even in pandemic times, I could see a lot of parents feeling like, if anything, we have to make it bigger, better than ever because of the pandemic. That's a lot of pressure to put on yourself in the middle of a pandemic, right?
I agree. I definitely agree. And I'm thinking, like, as a parent myself, I'm like, I'm going a little overboard on the presents this year, just because of how challenging it's been for everybody. And we're talking about everyone that's experienced COVID. And I think the real big piece is like focusing on the things that build that connection. And I think we get pulled into places like, excess sugar, doing these things, or doing multiple things to kind of occupy space. Because I think sometimes I even think about like, if I fill enough things in the day, then it'll be super fun and it'll keep us motivated. And I think also it's like finding balance, right? Focusing on what's I guess prioritizing what the needs are for yourself and the family. How do we put quality time in? If we don't do all the things, let's take the pressure off ourselves, like I said, and there could be this expectation that we put on ourselves. And a part of that is also ourselves letting go of some of these high expectations. What's a reasonable and attainable expectation for this? And what do I want? Is it more so around the things that we're doing or the time that we're sharing? And I think that's a good way to kind of put it.
I was also just going to add, like, something that stood out for me was around Halloween. I know it's not the same type of holiday, but because we work at MLSC Launchpad, there are a lot of kids, so we were able to engage with some of them and just hearing their stories around Halloween and how creative parents got. And instead of like having their kids going trick or treating, which they couldn't do, it was like a scavenger hunt around their house that they just had to go find candy. So I think, trying to find like what might feel like a reasonable piece for you, but still bringing in that aspect of like play and creativity if they're younger kids. If they're older kids, like Dave mentioned, like really collaborating with them and seeing like what might be something that's, again, like something that feels reasonable that we all want to do. Because some kids, especially the older teens, may not want to do all of like the holiday activities too. So it could be like, all right, like I don't have enough energy for this. I don't want to get into an argument around trying to pull you into doing this. What are like 2 or 3 things that we can come up with that we can do together? And I think also just having that space as well. So it might look different. Like maybe there is more time to be alone and just separate, and also time to come together. Because I know we've also had families that are like, we're tired of seeing each other. We see each other all the time. And like, there's not a whole lot new. So I think that's also okay. I think there's this time around like, connecting with each other, but also having your own space as well.
I'm also thinking of something that David said right off the top about collaborating with kids. So if you think perhaps your teenager might not want to pose in matching pajamas with the entire family and have that, streamed live all through the holidays, it's a good thing to check these things out ahead of time, right? So here's another question, and this one's kind of a heavy one. My heart goes out to the parent who asked this. What is your advice to parents who are newly separated? How can they make the holiday a positive experience for themselves and their families, even though things will be very different this year? And this is tough in the best of times, right?
So I think going back to validation, like I said, validation, I think is going to be our answer for a lot of the questions, and just validating how it's going to feel different, what feelings your children or teens might be experiencing, and just having space to talk to them and validate those feelings as well. Reminding them that there's some things that are going to remain consistent. So, your parents still love you. There's still this time that you're going to have together. It might just look a little bit different, but there's still these core pieces that are still there as well. Having the importance of like healthy communication, so around co-parenting, which I know sometimes can be really difficult in certain situations, but just seeing like, what that's going to look like for each other and kind of making that a smooth process. So like it's an easy transition maybe for your child to go in between. And again, going back to like creating new traditions. So maybe there are some traditions that you want to keep when you were together and you might do them separately. It might be an opportunity to look at like what are new traditions. So like you're mentioning, like, the photos and the teens, they may be like, that's not what I want to do, but maybe there are new things that they want to like explore and do. So I know like things like TikTok are really popular. I don't have an account, but I've been seeing like a lot more teens post, and they post with their parents. So like maybe that's something like a new piece of like doing a video together and just looking at what options and collaborating as well around that. And just validating again those pieces around feeling disconnected. So yeah, it might feel really hard that maybe like holidays bring up these feelings of having all your family together. This is the first time it's going to look really different, and people are going to be not in the same place. And the loss of like maybe what that feels like too can be like a bit more amplified during this time. So just giving youth and young people like space to talk about that, and sharing feelings as well around, what you might be experiencing and how this might be different as well. So again, going back to like how parents can really use themselves too to share their feelings. Not sure if you want to add anything, Dave.
I think the only thing I'd add is that, if this is the situation that families are in, it's also like another transition. So we're talking about transitions upon transitions upon transitions, and also validating that transitions are difficult, for myself. And, as a parent, you can also kind of like humanize that or normalize that, as well as also to know. And I think the big piece when I hear families in this situation is like really kind of the message, kind of normalizing that, families do look different. And that the families may look different for different people. At the same time, the things that bind, right? My love for you won't decrease; will just get better. That's the beauty about parenting, I guess. Like the love just increases. That could be a form of reassurance. I know that for young ones as well, there are books out there about the ever-changing family and how that looks like. So maybe. I was saying go to the library, but I don't think that's possible. But like, there's also ways that we can find literature that kind of talk about the ever-changing family, or how changes families look different, but the things that bind are still true and lovely. So I think that could be another way to kind of work through, especially for younger ones as well, to like kind of give them some context around like, okay, families do look different for different people, and it is hard because we're going to miss a whole bunch of things that we used to do, as well as the reassurance around the things that will stay the same.
I think just, sorry, adding on to that, I thought of something else is like even just checking in with like the people that you are around. So if you're a parent, like talking to other parents who might have gone through that and what are things that they've learned and what were things that were supportive. Obviously, it's going to look a bit different because of COVID, but at least using some of those pieces. And I know there was a question, or I saw something in the chat around like, more teen based or older. And I think, at that age, they might be able to talk to their peers. Like, do they have peers who have gone through something similar? And do they have any suggestions and advice? Because I think sometimes we isolate ourselves a bit more around these situations, but a lot of people are in these situations. And how do we use each other as community, as friends and support to really like learn and grow together?
Yeah, there's just something magical about the peer support piece, like where you're able to compare notes with somebody else who's been through this kind of experience, whether you're a kid or an adult, so maybe you'll be on your text messages with your friend and your kids will be text messaging the friend's kids, but everybody can get some of that support and figure out a path forward. So the holidays are the first part. And then after the holidays, we have like winter. And in Canada, that can be a tough time of year anyways, because a lot of us go like, oh, holiday excitement is behind us. And now it's January and February. So people are wondering if you could share some strategies for staying positive, again, the motivation piece and holding on to hope during the winter months ahead, because, in Canada, it seems like spring is long off, right?
What a great question, because I think what happens to me every winter is I realize like, oh, like winter's here? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been experiencing winter for quite a while now, but it always catches us off guard. And I think even more so now. And due to the shorter amount of daylight we have and the fact that it's getting colder and we may not want to go venture outside as much, I think that could definitely have an impact on motivation, our mental health and things like that. So really, validating that it is challenging, like, as we get less sunlight, we get less vitamin D, and that impacts our mental health as well. I think what kind of keeps you motivated is really kind of the one beautiful thing I think about COVID is like it allows us a moment to reflect on the year and the things that we really appreciate and the things that really mean a lot to us. You can also do some collaboration and some discussion around maybe some possible things that you might want to do with older children. Maybe reflect on relationships and the appreciating the time that you've spent with people. Really making space for experience and feelings, as well as there's things that you can do as a family around gratitude. I think is a really big one. It's like, we could be bogged down on what's not going right. And I say like families are and individuals so resilient. And that's what I see with my clients and people every day is like, I wonder if there's a moment to bring some gratitude. So like really it could be journaling, it could be reflecting as a family or on a one-to-one or as a family, whatever that is, allows us to give a different perspective on how 2020 has gone. And I'm thinking like a lot of people are really looking forward to leaving. So that's another good thing as well. But also, I also like gratitude is a really great way to appreciate. And there's one thing that I like to do sometimes as a with my clients or other families, like just take a minute and just think about things that we're grateful for. It could be a really great way to kind of bring that into our mind. I always say the things we focus on tend to grow, right? So if we can shift our perception to some things that we're really grateful for in spite of COVID, and not to take away from how tough it was, right? But definitely I'm seeing beautiful things happening on a day-to-day basis. That really highlight the strength and resiliency of people. So that could be something that you can definitely bring together. I think there's also incorporating things into your day or week that your child and yourself will enjoy. Some examples could be like family movie watching time. And, you know, I've had parents say like, we even pretend that we're in a different place. Like we made it into like a movie theater and like, or we made popcorn and called it like theater popcorn or whatever that is. If it's something physical, it could be maybe like the fitness, yoga, games night could be something as well. Or even interesting enough, like ways that we can build that bond. So like we might do things individually, right? Or we might do things together. So it could be like some time apart, and then also the coming together, I think, is the big piece. So it could be, I've also had parents like, oh, I'm asking my kids to teach me some things. And I'm like, that allows them to have a bit more space and feel like they have some agency in uncertain times. So that's some of the things that came to my mind. Nicole, did you have anything that maybe came to your mind as well?
I think like that gratitude piece can just be so helpful because I know with the younger kids, like I'll ask them, I'll talk to their parents first, and the parents will be like, "Oh, like this happened, and I'm really proud of them for this." And I'll talk to the young person, and they're just like, "I'm like, oh, did anything good happen?" They're like, "No, I can't think of anything." And so I think, and even as like if you're older as a teen, sometimes we focus, like Dave was saying, on some of those things that aren't going well. And again, not taking away from that piece around that there's still things going on that aren't great, but just allowing that opportunity to reflect like there are these little things, or even like the growth, like, you know, have you noticed anything about yourself, and just what are things that we can do together to kind of keep us feeling motivated and really looking into that self-care. I think that's so important, and I feel like we might be needing to do it more now because like it's just feeling very exhausting from everything. So that's just the only piece I would continue to like talk about.
Yes, and we have a related question. Some of these questions are going to be tough, I'm warning you. Here's a tough one. The parent is motivated to go outside, but not the teenager. And the teenager really just wants to stay indoors or stay in bed. And I mean, I have been the parent of those teenagers. It is really tough. And luckily I'm off the hook right now because I have you guys to answer the question. So
So Nicole, did you want to take that question on?
Yeah, so I think that's where that collaboration piece will come in a bit more around, you know, I think it's something that we hear a lot, and I've worked with a lot of parents with teens who are just like, my teen won't want to do anything and just wants to stay indoors. And I think being physically active is something that's also come up around like just not wanting your kid to just be inside. Something maybe seeing like, are there things that they can do? Sometimes it's easy if you have a pet, because I know some youth will like then go for walks for that. But it also might be like a time where, you know, maybe can you go for a walk by yourself if you don't want to come out with me? And maybe that's a time where you feel like you have a bit more privacy, like are there friends that you want to call that you can have a conversation, or can you do like a social distancing walk if that feels like something that's useful for you? I think it gets harder because it's winter, and I know for me personally, I'm not a winter person, but I know something we've been hearing is like people embracing it a bit more, because sometimes you do get tired of being inside for a while. So I think collaborating and seeing like, you know, is there anything that they would be interested in doing, even if it's like for like once a week, and kind of seeing around that, or is there an activity that they'd be more open to trying out and learning about and kind of working through that process?
yeah.
Want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the one piece I think those are great ideas is also like if your teenager or your child is hesitant to go outside, like really understand like what's kind of fueling that or what's underneath. I say like, can we identify the feelings that are underneath that behavior? And it may just be like, I don't like the cold because I don't like the cold. And that might be just that. It may also be maybe some anxiety around COVID. It could be a whole bunch of things that may be kind of like, I like to use the iceberg metaphor, like the behavior is what we see at the top and the stuff on the bottom is kind of the stuff that's fueling it. That kind of gets overlooked. So I think if we have a conversation about, what is kind of behind the like not wanting to go outside. It's like, you know what, like maybe I'm feeling like unsafe out there, and I don't know if people are gonna, abide by the rules or make me feel unsafe, or I feel anxious about this or that. So really kind of addressing that and validating that and working with that stuff can definitely shift how they may see going outside. That's all that I would add to that question.
Yeah. I used to really hate winter, like really hate it. And then I discovered that if you have warm footwear, and like I have these running shoes that have built-in spikes, I don't have to worry about falling and hurting myself. Just sometimes that makes a big difference for me. And then the other thing I've noticed is being tuned into nature. I'm lucky to live in an area with lots of trees, and sometimes I can just notice from one day to the next that the sky has changed, and there's something beautiful and peaceful of the continuity of nature, right? Because right now it seems like either we're in a holding pattern or we don't know what's happening next with our lives. But nature gets up every day and puts the sun in the sky and then puts it away at night. And it's just, there's something beautiful and reassuring about that. So I think if my 4 young adults were at home, that would be the part of my pitch for let's go for a walk around the block this evening. With 4 kids, I'd probably get 25% buy-in, but you got to work with what you can pull off as a parent, right? So okay, on to another question. And this is really related, actually. How can I help my teenager to still feel connected to their friends during the long winter months ahead? Because I know right now, if you say to a teenager, why don't you do Zoom? They roll their eyes like, people, we were so over that in March. But we have to work with the tools we have, right?
That's such a good question, Anne. I was like, I'm thinking the same way as well. Like, we can come with these great ideas to connect, why don't you do this? Or, pick up the phone. And they're like, we don't do that. We like text. And it's really, I feel like, kind of also kind of like talking about the disconnection of how tough that can be. It could be a part of it as well. It's like, and then really working with, I think what they're working with is a really good one too. It's like, what you feel most comfortable connecting with your friends with. Is it through phone calls? Is it through text? Is it, is there a social distancing visit that we could do, or whatever that is? Like, how do you connect? There's a lot of virtual platforms for youth to connect where they can take part in a class together. I think there's like yoga classes, dance classes. Not that I've taken part of those, but I heard they're out there. So really good stuff. Based on different interests that your young person may be into. And I think just as a part of that is research. And you can also work in terms of a teenager, definitely working on with collaboration, building up their agency. Is like, okay, it is hard, like being disconnected, especially during the holidays and they'd be doing things or whatever that is, or in the winter as well, where we can't go out and just like talk to whoever and do the things we used to do. But are there even like outdoor activities that we can do in a safe way? Is there platforms virtually that people feel comfortable, your teen feels comfortable using? What makes sense for them? Is it a voice message you send? Is it like a certain is there a certain thing that you can do like on videos, just do a video message that you can send? Like finding really creative ways for them to stay connected. One piece as well is sometimes we're hearing from parents that my child or children are really into video games at this time. And it's really interesting. We hear that quite a bit, is that the way that we find that youth are playing video games or using that platform as a way to connect. So I play with my friends, and then really kind of saying like, okay, well, that's really great that you're connecting. And I think also it's like they're super absorbed in that one type of connection. So how do we find other ways to connect? Okay, cool. I can understand why you want to be on your game. Let's not spend so much time on this. Let's put some diversity into the way we connect. That way you're not just using one tool, but using multiple tools at different times that could be helpful. So I think that's one way to kind of talk to, collaborate with your teenager on ways to connect, and really also like talking about the importance of friendships to them. Like, I really want you to be connected to your friends. I know my way is probably not your way, but let's figure out what your way is, because my way may be archaic to you now. So that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add on that, other than maybe just like, I know sometimes communication can be a bit harder and you're so used to communicating in certain ways. So maybe that might be a form of just checking in and seeing like, what's that experience like, and like, how are you feeling in terms of like connecting? So like a video game might feel easier to connect because you're talking about something, but like to text somebody might be a bit harder. Or like, I know sometimes like youth just send memes to each other and that's their way of connecting, but you still miss that in-person piece that if you were in school, you naturally would just see people and have those conversations. And I know sometimes for some people, it's also like, when you're at school, you talk to people, and then maybe during the summer breaks and the winter breaks, you're not talking to people as much. And so if you're not in that in-person school, that might feel like a lot where maybe those same connections aren't really happening. You're not really texting and talking to a lot of people because a lot of that would have happened in person. So I think collaborating again and kind of seeing what might be happening there.
Yes, and I see there's a comment here that makes me think of a conversation I had with a parent a couple of years ago where he found that his kids wanted to spend a lot of time doing video games online with friends, right? And the kid didn't seem to notice that this was having a big impact on his mood, but the parent noticed, right? So he said that part of what he ended up working through was just helping his child to notice, right? Like, how do you feel when you've spent 4 hours doing this activity online, like maybe, making a video or doing something creative or something? And how do you feel when you've been basically shooting at people or having some kind of, video game aggressive thing, like and then you're turning and snapping at your brother. So I think having some of those conversations where we get to explore one another's head, that can be really helpful, right?
I agree. It's a really great way to kind of talk about like that noticing piece. It's like when we talk about physical health and mental health, how they're so connected. When we bring those pieces in, like you could even notice things too. Like I notice that you get up in the morning and it's challenging for you, and whatever. And we could also do some psychoeducation on screens and how the light from screens activates certain parts of our brain, which make us feel good, but also make it harder for us to sleep and get to that sleep, that really wonderful sleep that that is recharging, and especially for teenagers where and I also talk to children about it too. Like the sleep is when you start to grow, like when you're down and sleeping is when things start happening in your body and you don't notice it because you're just on the outside, but internally so many wonderful things are happening, and we really want you to get that really nice sleep, so that things develop and things go really well, and all that kind of stuff. We kind of talk about health that way.
Just gonna add, like if you have younger kids, something that I found really interesting that I've done with some clients has just been like a little journal with their feelings. So like they just color in and how big and how small. So they might do it like throughout different stages, like the morning, afternoon, and evening. And that was just because like this one kid would be like, maybe everything just wasn't going so well. And they could only remember the negative feelings, but it allowed them to kind of see how they felt throughout the day as well, and just notice like, oh, okay, like there was like pieces of happiness, or like this was happening in this time and then maybe something changed, and then you can kind of bring that in around like what changed during that time.
Right, great. So now we're going to pivot into some more general parenting questions and concerns that aren't quite so narrowly anchored into like the holidays or winter, but obviously, they're perennial challenges that people face, right? So one of them is about convincing teenagers to adopt healthier lifestyle habits like getting enough sleep, going for walks, and other things that might genuinely help them to feel better. And I know we've seen research during the pandemic saying that a lot of kids are getting less physical activity at all ages, so that interferes with sleep and it interferes with mental health. It's like a whole package of things. Could you guys talk a little bit about that?
So I think because we're looking at teenagers again, kind of going into that collaborative piece around seeing like what they might be open to doing as well. You can identify things that like you can do with your teenager as well, and that might be like over the holidays. So, and sometimes if you're modeling something as a parent, like maybe the youth might follow in as well. So it could be like doing a fitness class and asking them if they want to come in, or maybe that looks a bit different. So again, like I know I mentioned TikTok before, which a lot of youth are using, and there are all these dances on it and like people trying to perfect it. But like that could be a form of like doing a bit of exercise in a way that doesn't seem like it's exercise, but it's like a fun way of doing that. It could be like looking around food and kind of seeing like other meals that they would want to make. And I know when I talk to youth and parents are like, it's so hard to get them to cook or to do these things. We always kind of bring it back to like, what are their goals for the future? Like, do they eventually want to live on their own? And can this be an opportunity to learn skills so that when they get to that point, they have some of these skills as well? And I feel like there's more incentive there because it's not like, oh, my parents telling me to cook and I don't want to cook, but it's like, oh, like this might be something that actually will be beneficial. Like I do want to move out, and it's like, oh, you're gonna eat mac and cheese every single day and frozen pizza, or do you want to eat like some of the things that are your favorite food? And like learning how to make that and using that opportunity as well. I think normalizing, with COVID, it's been a bit different. So maybe there were teenagers who were part of sports teams at school or played sports outside of that, and it can look and feel really different. And again, like that loss of community and that connection. Because I think as you get older, you tend to sometimes do things more with your peers. And so recognizing that that might be a loss, and it might be harder to be like, okay, like, let's go for a walk by myself. So again, it might be like, how can you connect with your friends? If it's like walking to school, can you guys socially distance? Or can you meet up with some of your friends who are online and you're in person, and like meet up in a socially distanced way and do like take a walk somewhere? And you again have a bit of that privacy where you all don't have to be like, there's somebody listening. Cause I know I work with some teens and they're just like, one would be like, I'm sitting in the garage because it's the only place no one's gonna bother me and like no one's gonna hear anything. But they needed Wi-Fi because our conversations were on Zoom. So that was that place. Otherwise, it would have been a walk. So I think like just trying to work with them and seeing what might be ways that they might be interested in, or are there activities that they've always wanted to try, and could this be an opportunity to try that? Or are there people that they look up to as role models, and what are some things that they're doing that they might want to incorporate as well? Dave, do you have anything?
Just to kind of add on to that, I really love how Nicole brought in that like kind of shifting gears from parenting, where it's like when they're younger, we're parenting to protect, right? Don't put your finger in the socket. Don't put things in your mouth. I think as they get older, we're parenting to prepare rather than to protect. It's like the skill building. Like how are we, building up skills in a collaborative way that can help carry them through, to adulthood. Another piece that has been working well with some clients of mine is bringing a challenge aspect to it. I know challenges are big right now. So it's like, I'll do this with you. We'll do a bit of a challenge around like getting in some physical exercise or eating a certain way or whatever that is. And at the end being the reward being not monetary or something that we buy, but more of that emotional connection. So emotional rewards, like we'll make a dinner, you get to pick what we're going to make. We'll do a movie night, you pick the movie. You pick how Friday night's going to look like for us, you know what I mean? Or that kind of stuff. Or with young ones, like a pajama kind of day. I think that was another one too as well. We'll do something really, really funny. I heard also recently someone, a parent that just did a birthday. It's not your birthday, but we're going to pretend we're doing a birthday just because to break it up. And I was like, isn't that just genius? Like being very creative, like, wow, we got 2 birthdays this year. You know what I mean? And just another way to kind of to reward in an emotional way.
That makes so much sense. So the next question is a worry question. And there's a lot of worry questions these days, right? What can parents do to support kids who might be really worried about the health of a family member, which could mean anything from a parent or a grandparent getting COVID, or maybe a family member who already had some kind of serious illness, and then the pandemic happened to add to the worry?
And this is a question, and this is something that's come up for our clients quite a bit, and the people we work with, like really kind of normalize and validate that it's totally understandable that you're feeling worried. We're bombarded by information, numbers, we're concerned about safety, and really, it could also be a piece around taking a break from media, taking a break from, we'll all put our phones away. We'll like kind of do a thing where we take a media break. Also really like talking about the ways that you can keep yourself safe. What safety mean to them, and to really identify things that they can control, like us as a family and you as an individual, rather than focus on things we can't. So it's really shifting gears around mindset. I'm also an art therapist, so I like to bring in artwork as well, for younger ones and not so younger ones. Like we can also do some artwork to ground ourselves, whether that is something that they come up with themselves or something that we might want to do together. Like, are we going to draw some mandalas or do some artwork, whatever that is? And it's great to do it with your child or children as a way that is kind of normalizing as well as being supportive. I think the reassurance piece is really great as well. It's like, there are a lot of things that we can't control. Right? And there's some things we can't. Let's focus on things we can, right? Especially in times of uncertainty, and that validation piece, allowing them to understand what worries are, and that, in a lot of kind of ways, like worries are really, anxiety and worries are very normal. If we didn't have anxiety, we would probably not be here as a species. Like it's really helpful in times where things are very challenging, that could be heightened. And how do we ground ourselves? I think when we work on our bodies rather than the cognitive piece, like what can we do to bring our bodies? Because it's interesting because our bodies and mind are so connected, and we feel anxious and triggered. our bodies tend to experience different things around the worry. So that's another way that we can kind of talk about it, as well as figure out creative ways to kind of cope with those feelings of anxiety or worry.
I think like something that we've also noticed has just been like families where maybe there's one parent and there's like it just really gets amplified because like if my one parent gets like sick, like what happens? And so there is more worries. I think again, like understanding what Dave's talking about with the iceberg, like what's the feelings underneath it and what's happening. So is it like this loss of like, you know, you're the one person who's gonna support me and I care so much about you and I can't like I just it would be too hard to think about you even being sick, just being able to like validate some of those pieces and talk about like how you are keeping safe. And also like I have other clients who just have anxiety, so like and they know like certain people in their families may have like maybe more at risk, and just acknowledging that and where it comes from and really just having that conversation. So sometimes it can feel like overwhelming or annoying behavior because it's like, oh, this person keeps telling like them to wash their hands, so like won't let anyone come in the house unless they wash their hands. And it was like unpacking that and really just noticing like there was just so much care and love that she had towards her family members and just so much worry. And this was the one way that she felt like she was able to keep people safe. And even acknowledging it and being like, yeah, I can recognize I might be annoying here. But I think just understanding like, you know, where is that coming from and like the intentions of it and how to work together with that piece.
Right. So I think the next question we're going to tackle is one that's just come up via the comments, and that is a couple of people asking about how parents can help kids to still stay motivated and focused with remote learning situations where, you know, the novelty may have worn off and remote learning isn't like optimal for, I guess, most kids. It's a strange solution that we have to rely on right now. So what would you say to parents who are really worried? Because I can understand, like, you would feel like it was your job to make this work, but yet depending on the age of the child, that gets complicated, right?
So I know we spoke about this as well in a previous webinar, and I think tomorrow in the letter that will be sent, there'll be more information specifically around the school piece. But I think it's just maybe seeing what's working for them. Like I know for me as an adult, like being on the computer the whole time and seeing screens is a lot and it can feel draining. So I can't imagine being like a younger child and having to do that and being engaged. I've also heard lots of parents say like the remote learning, they don't really have time to actually engage with other peers. It's very much like we just have to sit, listen, kind of do the work. And so one parent was actually being really creative around like how to create space for the kids to connect a bit more and having some of that downtime. I know other parents have said that sometimes the kids might go and play like Minecraft during like the break, and that's their way of like connecting as well. It might also be, you know, checking in with your child or your teenager to be like, what's working and what's not working. And like based off of how the family feels of safety, is this something that we want to continue or how can we adapt? So I've heard some parents be like, I think I need my kid to have more breaks because they find that like, you know, if you put a kid on a laptop, they end up on Google and like searching stuff or on YouTube. And it's so easy to do that because the distraction is right there. And especially when you're tuning out. So I think checking in and seeing, it might be engaging maybe some physical activities in. So, you know, I always think like when you're doing something that might be like we call exercise, like it doesn't have to be like an hour working out. It could be like, okay, we're gonna take a minute break and we're just gonna do as many jumping jacks as possible, and just kind of changing up the environment, kind of getting yourself like back into like this different space and just seeing if that might be different ways of learning, as well as understanding that not everyone is meant to learn remotely. We all have different learning styles. So I think validating those pieces and seeing like, you know, are there different things? So like, are there times where you might be able to step away from it and still work on it, but in a way that feels useful for you? I think that's just some points that I can think of.
Yeah, and I think I'm not going to add too much to it because I think we touched some good points. Is I think I always tell parents like, you know your kids the best, and you know what works for them the best, and really kind of building up their agency around like, you know, ways to advocate if things are challenging. I think having kids or anybody sit down in front of the Zoom for extended periods of time is challenging, and I even think about our little ones or not so little ones or teenagers that they may not feel comfortable sitting for that period of time. So the breaks are really great. I think setting a routine could be really helpful around kind of consistency, as well as different creative ways to kind of sit. Like you can stand up, or you can sit on like like one of those bouncy balls or whatever kind of gets that energy out. I think that's a good way to kind of be creative around that kind of stuff. Like I think the expectation of someone sitting for a long period of time is really difficult, you know, because students are able to in the past before COVID is kind of move around a little bit. You go from class to class or recess or whatever that is, that you get to kind of expend some of the energy, but now it's getting more challenging to do so. So just really kind of working in a creative place around those kinds of things.
Right. And here's a question from a parent, and I'm sure there's like a certain amount of desperation built into this question because I really empathize with this parent. They're saying, I'm running out of ideas about ways to keep my 3-year-old entertained while we're spending so much time at home. Any thoughts?
This is a great question. I think, especially at that age, right? I have a daughter that's close to that age. So, really using play. And it's interesting that there's been a lot of research around, especially in this age group, around the effectiveness of play. So, children use play as a way to experience the world, problem solve, conflict resolution, distress tolerance. So really using play in terms of finding ways. Like, I think we can kind of plan as many things as we want, but child-directed play is so effective. It allows a child to be exploratory, figure things out, also feel like agency. So I think the one piece I always say to parents is like, really remain childlike, not childish, childlike, because that allows you to connect with your child through play and playfulness. Interesting enough, when we take a back seat and let the child lead, and we may try to correct, like, don't do that this way, or like fight that urge to do so, and really kind of go into their world, because it allows them to explore and also takes no place away from this current kind of situation where they're kind of using their imagination. So really sharpening and practicing those skills that will translate into their lives in other ways as well. So really going for that place of play, I always is the way I like to go about that kind of stuff.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Okie doke. Well, we have 2 related mental health questions. One is about when to worry, when to sort of like tune into, I guess, evidence or something that your child is beginning to struggle with their mental health. And a related one is a big worry that I hear from parents all the time, which is, will my child suffer lasting damage as a result of the pandemic, because of reduced opportunities for socialization, and also just like the anxiety, the sadness, the trauma, all those things.
I think with like the worry, it's really like checking in. So we mentioned before, like about noticing and like sharing those pieces. Like I've noticed, like maybe you're not as engaged in certain activities as you were, or maybe you like your mood seems a little bit off, and just checking in. And I think when you come at it in a way of like just really compassionate, and again, I think like that validation is so important, because so many times I think parents come from such a good place. Like you want to support your child, you want to help them, and so sometimes you're providing solutions, but sometimes it's just validating. And that just allows them space to be like, okay, like my parent understands what I might be feeling, and maybe opening up a bit more in terms of what they might be experiencing. And I think brainstorming with them. So again, collaborating, especially if they're older, like what might be ways to like feel better, or to like take a break and notice certain things, and noticing that this is a difficult time and we all are experiencing these different pieces. I think when we're looking at like the lasting effects of this, really looking at the resiliency. So when we have support, when we're able to like talk about these things, we're able to kind of move through it. So I think many of us are experiencing lots of pieces around maybe feeling a bit anxious or feeling a bit like unmotivated. And it's been so much change, so much transition, especially if there was a loss in the family because of this as well. Just being able to see like, what are some of the things that we can do together and support each other together to kind of move through this, and allowing space for those feelings to exist. I think sometimes we also try to rush through things. Or I know there was something that I was reading, and it was just like, yeah, like so many times, if your kid falls on the ground, and the first thing that you usually say is just like, you're okay, you're fine, like walk it off. And it's like, but your kid's upset because they fell. And like just being able to sit with that feeling a bit and just allowing them to experience that can be really helpful in terms of them like moving on and like building that resiliency piece. Yeah, I'm gonna pass it over to Dave.
And I'll add on a couple of pieces. I think when we look at different age groups of kids, like when you have younger folks, so younger ones, I'm thinking like you can definitely use your parent eye and kind of see how things are going. You may ask questions like, are you feeling sad? And really kind of do the validation. And I think when we start to notice things are very quite atypical, right, and kind of frequent and intense, then we can kind of look to like, should we kind of consult with a person like Nicole or Dave around the supports, and then we have a better idea of, we've had quite a few parents that reached out around certain things like, hey, I'm noticing this. And I'm like, okay, fine, we can have a conversation to see how we can support. When we have older ones like teenagers, I always get like keeping the door open to conversation. Like, things are tough. I really want you to come to me and feel comfortable telling me what's going on. If you ever need support, please reach out to me. It could be in different ways. It could be through an emoji, it could be through a text, it could be a conversation, being creative, as well as really kind of bringing home the fact that like there's some things that we can do as a family, and there's tremendous things that we can do, and knowing when we have to bring an external person to kind of support as well. Right, we're noticing quite a bit of challenging times for our folks or the clients that we work with, and it's knowing when to bring in someone and reach out to support. So we're definitely available. We'll talk about some other resources as well. The email will kind of focus on that as well. Is that when do we know that this is something that is within our capacity right now, where we have to bring in someone else, either on a consultation basis or something else, is knowing when that line is. And I say, especially with teenagers, keeping those the doors open. And co-regulation really helps, where we can feel really up, like, what's going on? And it's like, if we come down and be like, okay, it is hard. And you know what? That seems really, really tough for you. It seems like this is something beyond what I can do as a parent right now. And we're going to go do this together and reach out for support so that you're doing okay. And I think that's a great piece. And I think as parents, having the doors open and have the open communication. And I think with teens, sometimes it's quite limited, as well as being able to keep the door open and kind of reassure them that whatever you bring to me, I'll be okay with, because we'll get support around that. And that allows teenagers to lean in towards that conversation rather than become isolated and things go underneath. So I think that's a great way to kind of keep the doors open around that conversation.
And just a little follow-up question to that. Like, I think teachers are also wondering, how can they assess if a student is doing okay, when they're not seeing them in the classroom as they normally would in some cases, right? If it's just a virtual learning kind of situation, and what you would say to them about sort of, picking up on cues or making channels for communication outside the classroom or whatever the case might be, because teachers really care and they want to be there for students as well. So
That's a really good question. I think our conversations with teachers and staff that work at schools and people that support schools, it's really challenging with this virtual platform. Like it's hard to get the subtle nuances as you would in the classroom. If you're like you're at the front doing your thing. I'm also a professor as well, so I kind of have that experience. Is that you can notice when someone is maybe not as talkative or maybe a bit more isolated or whatever that is, and you can kind of jump on those things and kind of support. It's challenging when it's in a virtual format because maybe they'll turn their camera off or may just stay quiet, or maybe that's just kind of how the classroom is looking. I think also focusing on when things are atypical, when you're noticing that a certain child is maybe not attending regularly, or the cameras are off more, or they're maybe not as vocal, and I think also for teachers as well, this might be a new teacher and you're really getting to know them too, right? So I really my heart goes out to teachers and schools right now. They're really trying their best, and I think the piece is like they're doing the best they can with what they got. I think having really great communication also with parents as well. Like, I've had teachers kind of reach out on an email, say, hey, I'm Mr. Cho and I'm teaching da-da-da. If you have any questions or anything, keep those channels open. And I think it's also very challenging. And I think we're limited in how we can kind of identify when things are challenging. I think also, in the classroom, you have a bit more kind of eyes on things, even if you have a lot of kids there, but really kind of noticing little atypical behaviors possibly. For teenagers, I've had teachers kind of reach out and be like, hey, how are you doing with schoolwork? Doing these little check-ins, that might be helpful as well. And creating space. Like I've also had teachers that create like a debrief time, like maybe a little bit of time at the end of the class to kind of, how was today? Like how are things going? Like kind of making space for that. And also parents also making space for that. It's like little check-ins, like how's school going? Yeah, it is different. It's hard sometimes, and you don't get that nonverbal stuff that we would in the classroom, which allows children and students to kind of get an idea of what's going on a bit more. So those are kind of my thoughts around that.
Everything I've mentioned, like that Dave mentioned, I think works really great, and maybe just incorporating spaces maybe within the classroom, of just having little breaks or doing little bits of self-care as well. Because I think it is hard, especially if it's virtual, to keep them engaged. So if you're noticing like, okay, at this time with younger kids, maybe everyone's like all over the place, maybe it's like practicing a bit of mindfulness and incorporate that into the classroom, and keeping those channels open to connect, and like letting youth and like teenagers know that like you're there in case they need supports, and helping them to connect as well.
So that was probably the fastest hour of your life, right? Once we start talking, it just goes like that. But I did want to wrap up with one final question for both of you. And that is for people who, are still sitting here at the end of the session with heavy hearts and a lot of worries about their kids. How can parents tap into support? What is the first thing they should do either tonight or, tomorrow morning in order to sort of make things better for themselves and their families?
I think just like giving yourself some space and time. I think we all are going through a very challenging time. So I think always bringing in that compassion. I know in the email tomorrow, I think there's going to be a list from CMHO, and you can see like what mental health agencies are around in your area that you can access. I know David mentioned in the beginning, you can also reach out to us. So we do have some limitations around, we're Toronto based. And there's 2 of us with a caseload. So we will do our best to like respond, but just letting people know in case if you don't live in Toronto and you're reaching out, we might not be able to connect with you because of the limitations we have. But we're part of an agency that Luminous is a newly formed agency from 4 mental health agencies. So we can always share the walk-in in case if anyone's interested. And you could just call, and they're kind of spread out around Toronto as well, especially for the holidays. Like if things come up, I know more places are closed during the time, and it might be harder. Dave and I won't be working, so our drop-in will be closed, but Luminous as an agency will have drop-ins as well. So recommending like the CMHO site, and then you can also reach out to us if you're in Toronto and you want to connect with other places. And then I know like there's for like younger kids, sometimes they feel comfortable with like Kids Health Phone, and they know there's a chat option too. Am I missing anything, Dave, that you can think of?
All good stuff. And I think the other pieces also, you can definitely connect with us if around some resources around certain things as well. So, it's great to kind of connect, whether you are outside of Toronto or not. It could be like, we could also kind of try to bridge you to things that are in your area, maybe do a bit of research around that. So please please definitely take a look at that email and look at what resources are available. You might do a little bit of research on your own, or you may kind of reach out to us to see what's good for you, and we can maybe steer you in the right direction.
So the takeaway message, I think, is pretty clear. You don't have to get through the holiday season and the long winter months ahead alone. There are a lot of people who care about you, and there are a lot of resources available to you. So just reach out and know that there are a lot of people cheering for you and your kids. So thanks very much to Children's Mental Health Ontario for hosting this tonight. And thank you, David and Nicole. It was so lovely working with you both.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.